challenge my partners. If this is your first time on Science on Tap, we are a monthly science education outreach program. We bring curiosity in the community together, have conversations. I originally started exploring this topic for this evening by thinking about urban planning. I, of course, gone down a rabbit hole on YouTube and how cities were planned or developed, and I wanted to know more about Cincinnati. I reached out to Over-the-Rhine Community Housing to talk about this, and obviously affordable housing is becoming more and more of a hot topic. At the time, I didn't realize they had a development right here in Northside, so it seemed like a perfect intersection to invite them to speak to us tonight. So please welcome Mary to the stage.
Good evening. My name is Mary Burke Rivers. I'm the Executive Director at Over-the-Rhine Community Housing, and I'm here tonight with Claire Doherty. She's our Director of Philanthropy and Communications. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about a little bit about what we do at Over-the-Rhine Community Housing, and then the math challenge of affordable housing. I know sometimes affordable housing, well, I know that the sources, the capital stacks, the funding of affordable housing is very complicated. And sometimes people have this idea of what affordable housing is. So we just would like to break it down to what the real challenge is, and it's the math doesn't work. It doesn't work for the developer, and it doesn't work for the people in our community who do really important jobs, but don't get paid a wage that allows them to afford housing in the marketplace. So a little bit about Over-the-Rhine Community Housing. Next slide. Here's our mission. We've been around technically, I guess, since 1978, but we're the result of the merger of two long-standing community development corporations. One was called Over-the-Rhine Housing Network, and the other was called Restock. If you're a long-time Cincinnatian, you might have heard of Restock. They used to be in the news quite a bit back in the day. But we merged in 2006 to create Over-the-Rhine Community Housing. And so we believe that we took the best of both organizations and brought them together to create who we are today. And now we own and manage 658 units in 130 buildings. And as was shared, we're doing development outside over the Rhine now too. So we have a development here in Northside called Vandalia Point that we're very excited about. Actually, today we started taking applications for the apartments. And it should begin leasing up like in November. And probably we'll have a ribbon cutting sometime in early next year. It's very exciting. Next slide. Okay. So we focus in 4 areas. Like I said, we merged in 2006, and when we did that, we decided to create specialties and departments, whereas before, when we were both 2 smaller organizations, we all wore a lot of hats. But now we have a property or real estate development department that puts the complex financing together to develop affordable housing. We have a property management and maintenance departments, so that we take care of our properties. We do the property management. Often there's a property management company or a developer, and rarely are they together under the same roof. And then we also have resident services, where we support residents. And we provide a range of housing types, from permanent supportive housing for people who experience chronic homelessness and chronic addiction, to recovery housing for people who have experienced homelessness and are in recovery, to senior housing, to just affordable rental housing, again, for those folks in our communities who do important jobs but don't get paid much. So that's the inventory of housing that we have. So resident services can be specialized, like at the permanent supportive housing for people who experience homelessness, to just providing support for folks who maybe car broke down, need to take care of that repair, can't pay the rent. So what we do is, with property management and resident services in-house together, that allows the property management team to sort of be the bad guy, to talk to people and say, you got to pay your rent, because we do need people to pay their rent. In early days, sometimes we'd be too lax, and then you can't operate because you don't have any money. So they can, carry the stick, and then resident services can follow up and say, well, here's some resources for you. Here's how we can help you take care of that rent payment or that car repair, or, whatever you might be experiencing in your household that's keeping you from living your best life. So we have all that in-house, and those departments work together. And then we do education and advocacy, and this is part of that work tonight. Next slide. So this, slide kind of focuses on the residents of Over-the-Rhine that we serve, but I think this is probably true now across our inventory, which includes Lower Price Hill. We have a development in Lower Price Hill. We also have a development in the Central Business District on 9th Street called the Barrister. But on average, our residents earn less than 40% of the area median income. So we'll get to what that means, 40% of area median income, later in the slide. And you might have seen some of the handouts on the table that speak to that. But that's the language that affordable housing talks. We talk about percentage of area median income, which is challenging for all of us, because what does that mean in terms of rent? Because I think what we really want to understand is what the rent is. And then we can say, oh yeah, that's affordable, or no, it's not. But when I say 80% of AMI, really what does that mean? So we'll get to that later. So we serve people, though, that 40% of area median income is considered very low income. And then again, we serve seniors, individuals with disabilities, and then people who have experienced homelessness and are struggling. So we really embrace vulnerable members of our community. And we have really skilled staff that have been doing it a really long time and get a lot of joy out of doing it, and they're skilled at it. Next slide. So again, we're going to talk about the math problem. So I can't remember where this came from, this quote at the top, but maybe you can see it better than I can. But it speaks to the math problem in housing. Developers like us, we don't build affordable housing or unaffordable apartments. We build apartments. Some are no doubt nicer than others, but this alone doesn't make them expensive or inexpensive. So we all have like the same costs, land costs, construction costs. When materials went up during COVID, it affected us just like it affected the upscale developers. So there's some things that we all have in common. It costs money to develop housing. Again, the cost to build an apartment is largely the same, regardless of the rent. Market rate housing utilizes rental income to pay down the cost of construction. And by that we mean if my rental income cash flows to a significant amount that I can afford more debt, that's how I can finance the development of my project. I can put in equity, I can put in our own cash, and then I can take out a loan. But again, you need rents to cover your operating expenses and any debt that you take out. So where the challenge comes in is when people can't afford to pay what it costs to develop housing. And that's where this big gap comes from. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about market rate rents and why we have an affordable housing crisis, which we have here in Cincinnati, which some of you might have heard about or experienced or know people who are experiencing the crisis. It's not, specific to here. It's all across Ohio, all across the country. And looking at what market rate rents are here in greater Cincinnati, and then what the incomes a person would need to afford those rents. So a market rate studio apartment rents for about $1,000 a month. And I don't know if any of you are renters or if you're looking, but you could probably speak to this better than maybe I can. And so there's a rule of thumb that your housing is considered affordable if you pay no more than 30% of your income for your housing costs. That could be your rent and your utilities. If you're a homeowner, it could be your mortgage and your real estate taxes. But generally, if you pay more than 30%, it's considered unaffordable. So you can do your own math and decide if your housing is affordable to you. So if we use that 30%, we can take a look, for me on the right-hand side, for you too on the right-hand side. If we take that studio apartment rent and divide it by 30%, we get I don't think all the math is there, but we did the math so that we could figure out what would be an affordable rent. Let me back up. What income would allow you to afford that $1,000 a month unit? And that works out to $40,000 annual income, which is about $19.40 an hour, to afford a studio in the marketplace. I screwed that up a little bit. Does that all make sense if you do the math? Okay. So I don't know, like, there's lots of jobs out there that don't pay $19.40 an hour. And that's if you want to rent something in the marketplace. Again, the challenge gets steeper the larger the unit you need. If you're looking for a one-bedroom, if you're a single parent with 1 or 2 kids, in order to afford that 2-bedroom at $1,299 a month, you need to earn about $51,000 or $52,000 annually. And I didn't do the math on that. I did bring my phone up. So what does that work out to be an hour? And I really think affordable housing is just really about getting out your calculator and doing the math. And you can see, well, geez, I can't afford that, or that's not affordable, or I can't reach the teacher in my kid's preschool because I know that he or she makes, $15 an hour. So let's see, what was that, $51,960? $25 an hour. Thanks, Claire. So again, there's lots of jobs out there that don't pay that kind of wage. There's people that work with me that don't get paid that kind of wage. So the challenge is how can we get people who are doing important jobs housing in the marketplace? And then there's some jobs listed there where you can see what the hourly wage is, what that turns out to their annual income. And this is all gross, not net. So net is can be significantly less than what your gross looks like. But you can see the school bus driver might be okay with a 1-bedroom. 2-bedroom is going to be a little bit more challenging. So if it's a school bus driver with 2 kids, they might be able to do the 2-bedroom. The home health aide, looks like he or she really can't find anything decent in the marketplace. And that's been our experience as we've worked with folks. And then if I'm retired or disabled and I'm on Social Security, then I'm really facing challenges to try to find something decent in the marketplace. Next slide. Okay, so what is AMI? Area Median Income. Again, this is the language that we talk in the affordable housing world. It's a regional area median income. It encompasses Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, so it's a pretty big area. It's not the city proper. So they take the median and then calculate percentages of that median for the different family sizes. So affordable housing is considered affordable at 30% of the area median income. And that's considered very low income. And these are the tools that HUD uses as we're using the different sources that the Department of Housing and Urban Development has to deploy to support affordable housing development. So when I say I'm doing a project at 30% area median income, you can see that for a family of 4, that's a household making $31,000 a year, roughly $15 to $16 an hour. And then on up. So we might come back and forth to this because we can use it later as we're looking at some other things. And you got the handout, so you'll have it with you too to refer to. So far, so good? Okay, next slide. Okay, so here we go. Here's some of the calculation. Affordable housing based on the area median income. I did a family of 3 and a single person household. So a household that is at 30% of the area median income, we saw those numbers. So for a family of 3, that would be a household that is earning about $28,000, $27,000, or $29,000 annually. Divide that by 12 months, multiply it by 30%. And so what is affordable to that household, that family of 3 at 30%, is $709 a month. And that includes rent and utilities. So you can start to see on the rental side, the challenge is I'm working, I'm making this money, but when I go to look for an apartment in the marketplace for myself and my family, it just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. What does exist, and maybe some of you know this, is that there are landlords who will rent to me, if that's my income level, charge me more than $709 a month, knowing that eventually something's going to happen and I'm not going to be able to afford it and it's going to crash and I'm not going to be able to pay my rent. And then they evict me, throw some paint on it, and rent to the next kind of desperate person. I used to be a social worker and work with folks who are looking for housing, and that is really, that there is that market out there. And it's challenging because I know periodically the city will crack down on those landlords, and neighbors want people to crack down on those landlords, but they're providing housing for folks that otherwise wouldn't have housing. So that it's, when I ever see those crackdowns happening, I know it's important, but if they're serving this market that no one else can serve, there's a challenge. It's all part of the same math challenge. And maybe I'll get to what I think the solution is ultimately. So then as you move up to 50% AMI, you know, the income is higher, therefore the rent that a person can afford is higher. But still, for a single person at 50%, they can only afford $918 for rent and utilities. So it's still going to be a challenge. 60% rents, those are relatively high, but that's called affordable housing. So what we started doing is challenging some of our partners and ourselves when we say we're doing affordable housing and we're charging $1,400 for a 3-bedroom. It is technically affordable, but I think it's more honest to tell people what that rent is. And then, you know, for a couple of reasons, because it's just more honest and people will know what that affordable means. So maybe, on one hand, maybe people won't be so scared of it because of people I know are afraid to have affordable housing next to their property or next to their home because they were concerned about property values. And we have a good story about that too, real life story. So maybe once they hear, oh, the rent's $1,400, so it's not going to be, I don't know what stereotype they might have about affordable housing. So that's one thing. But also, if I'm a developer and I'm getting kudos for doing affordable housing, I think it's really important for us to ask, well, what's the rent? Should we really be celebrating that you're doing affordable housing when the rent is $1,400? It's important, but I think it's important that we name the rents. At the same time, so we have some properties that we're developing here in this neighborhood, and we're providing rents at 30%, 50%, and 60% AMI. Partly because the math, that we can't get people to invest in the property, we can't get a permanent loan if we're charging 100% at 30%. Like if all of our rents are $700, we'll be like, well, you can't do that because you won't be able to pay your operating costs. And you need to borrow money and you won't be able to pay off the debt. So really the circumstances, like I've been doing this for 30 years, and early on when we were doing developments, we could do 100% at 30% AMI, 100% of $400, $500 a month rents. And that would be enough to pay, well, we didn't even have to do debt. We didn't have to borrow money because we could put the development deals together without borrowing money. So all we had to worry about was real estate taxes, which we know what's happening with real estate taxes right now. It's killing us, and affordable housing. Real estate taxes, insurance, operating costs. And we could do that with a $400, $500 a month rent. But now we can't have all 54 units at Vandalia Point at $700 because we wouldn't be able to pay our bills and investors wouldn't invest in it. So it's a real challenge. And then 80% rents, you can see how high those are. And part of the challenge is if you look at that AMI chart again, it's for the region. You know, so we're pretty wealthy as a region, but the city proper, like who would consider an $1,800 a month rent affordable, right? But that is affordable, supposedly for a family of 3, it's an 80% rent. HUD says anything serving 80%, 60%, 50%, 30% is affordable. Most of the HUD programs, Department of Housing and Urban Development, serve households at 60 and below. So most of the funds don't go up to 80%, but developers will call that affordable too. Okay, gonna move on. So can you do the next slide first, and then we'll come back to that one. Okay, so here's a deal that we did in the Central Business District, and just real quick sort of thumbnail sketch of the development side. So the acquisition costs, the construction costs, the soft costs, and then putting reserves aside. And then included in our budgets is this thing called developer fee, which is really important to our affordable housing model. It's money that we can get as the developer. So in this case, we were co-developer with Urban Sites. So that developer fee is split between both of us. For us, it serves our mission to provide affordable rents and to pay for the support services. It's critical to our sustainability. However, the developer fee is the first line item to go when there's cost overruns. That's the first place that we just chip away at. It's so sad when that happens. And for this deal in particular, our developer fee, I think it's gotten all the way down to nothing. We got a first installment when we closed on financing, and that may be all that we get ultimately. So while it looks great initially, it is the first thing to go. And again, it's what we rely on for sustainability, so it's been a challenge this year, and it will continue to be a challenge. So that's a little bit about how much it might cost to develop. And then on the sources side, we've gotten pretty good at putting this capital stack together. The TC equity is tax credit equity. It's a really complicated tool, low-income housing tax credits. It's really the only tool in our country to develop affordable housing. It's very complicated. It's an IRS program, and it's very competitive. So each state has their own way to allocate tax credits to a project. In Ohio, it's the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, and we can only apply once a year, and it's very competitive. And then we get an allocation of credits, and then we sell it to mostly banks now. They'll buy the tax credit and get a dollar for dollar actual credit on their tax liability for that year and for 10 years. So it's a good deal for the banks. It used to be other players in the field too, like insurance companies, but it's primarily banks now. So that's what that $12 million is. And then the Ohio Housing Finance Agency has a grant program, so we got $600,000 in grants. The city of Cincinnati has some federal dollars called home funds, and we got $900,000 grant there. Deferred fee, so that $1.3 million up there, we defer some of it to get paid if there's cash flow in operations. So like I said, we don't ever really get that full developer fee. So we deferred for $400,000 of it. And then philanthropy. That's where Claire comes in. And raises, in this case, was actually over $900,000. That used to not be necessary, but it is now. With all of our deals going forward, we have to raise philanthropy. And that means Claire's writing a lot of grants, talking to lots and lots of people, telling our story and how important this is. And then we have this permanent loan, which is amazing. It's not a traditional loan from a bank. It's from an entity called LISC. And of course, you can't get 3.96% from a bank. But we need all of that in order to make the math work on the development side. Yeah, and then we can go to the previous slide. But that's where that 3.96% interest rate really is important, because that allows us to charge affordable rents. If our interest rate on the perm loan was higher, then we'd have to charge higher rents to pay off that mortgage. And what they want to see is that the project cash flows, because the investors are in the deal for 15 years. So you have to map out the operations over a 15-year period. So we can start really sort of healthy in the first year of stabilized operations. So it's not the first year when you're leasing up, but the next year when you have 100% leased. They need to see cash flow. So in this case, the cash flow was $34,000 in year one, and that might seem like, oh, well, you're fine. Yeah, we need to have that because hopefully things go well. But over time, by year 15, the cash flow looks like $9,364. So that's real tight. So you can see in that deal what our rent range was. So we served 30% to 60% AMI. So our rent range was $471 to $1,245 per month. And then we have that annual income. And then we have to set aside money for reserves. And then our debt service, which was $71,266 annually. But again, if our interest rate was higher, then our rents would have to be higher. I think that's all I want to say about that slide. Any questions? Is that it? What's the next? What was the slide before that? Yeah, I guess that's it. Hopefully, I've said enough to make the math problem clear, that it's on the development side. We can't take out any debt, or if we do take out debt, it has to be really affordable debt, like at 3.96% interest. And then even then, we have philanthropy that needs to come in so we can afford to build the property. And then on the operating side, we need to charge rents high enough to pay operating costs. At the same time, having this mission to serve our neighbors who can't afford the rents in the marketplace. I will say about our 60% rents, if you want to go back a couple slides to see what that is. One of the things we can do, you probably all heard about Section 8 housing. So Section 8 housing can come in two different ways at least. One is it's attached to the property. So in the case of the project that we just showed you called the Barrister or Vandalia Point, we don't have Section 8 attached to the property. When we do have some buildings like that, and when it's attached to the building, if you're low income, you make $10 an hour, you need affordable housing, you can come in and rent from us, and say the rent is $1,400 because you have a 3-bedroom, maybe you can only afford $400, the other $1,000 comes from the Section 8 housing assistance payment contract. So me as the owner, I'm made whole. I can take out loans based on that because I have this contract from HUD that says how much my rent is going to be every month. But for the user, for the person who's moving in, their rent is affordable. When they move out, the rent subsidy doesn't go with them, it stays with the building. So that's one form, attached to the building. The other form is attached to me, the renter, and that's called a Section 8 voucher. Some of you might have heard of that. So in the case of the property that I showed you, the Barrister or Vandalia Point, if you're a voucher holder, you can rent one of those units from us. And you can pay whatever portion that's affordable to you, the 30% of your income. You can pay the $500, even though the unit is renting for $1,000. And the Section 8 program will pick up the other $500. So as the owner then, I'm made whole. There are some limits on that. The Section 8 program will only pay up to a certain level. They're not going to pay for a $1,400 a month studio or a $2,000 a month 1-bedroom. They have caps on the rent levels that they will pay. And that can be a challenge because that limits the pool of apartments that people can shop for with their Section 8 voucher. It's a program that a lot of people don't want to mess with. A lot of property owners don't, because the Section 8 program requires inspections. And I don't mean that in a negative way if you don't want to take Section 8. But sometimes there are things that you don't necessarily need to fix. So there's a lot of property owners who don't want to have someone telling them, inspecting their units and telling them you need to fix A, B, and C, and D before we'll approve this unit. So that's kind of hard to work with. And then on an unfortunate note, our Section 8 program, it's administered by Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority, CMHA, and they've overspent their allocation. So there are no new Section 8 vouchers being deployed right now. So if I was in the queue to get a Section 8 voucher and I did my paperwork but I didn't get it in my hand yet, I'm back in line again. But if I already have a Section 8 voucher, I better do everything I can to hold on to it, because if I lose it, the likelihood of me getting it back right now when they've overspent their allocation is very low. But if I already have a voucher and I follow all the rules and my landlord does all the paperwork right, I mean, I can still use it. So people could still use it at Vandalia if they have a Section 8 voucher. But no new vouchers will be deployed until sometime maybe the first quarter of next year. So that's really unfortunate because the need is so great. And there's so many people who are in the queue and this close. Yeah, I think that covers pretty much the math problem. Those were pictures of Vandalia. If you're in Northside, if you drive by that, you've probably seen it. It's beautiful, and we're very excited to lease them up. And we're so grateful to the Northside community, if any of you are from Northside, because the Northside community supported the project. And sometimes, like I said, affordable housing, people get scared and get up in arms about it and try to block it from coming to their community or their block. Or did you have a question?
Yeah, you may have said this already, but can the renters have to provide proof of income when they apply for these properties?
Yes. So the question is, do renters have to provide proof of income? And yes. So when we, like today, or was it yesterday? Yesterday, yeah, we had folks come in. There was like 77 people came in to fill out an application for Vandalia Point. We only did it for one day. And so they just do this initial paperwork, and then our leasing manager, Ms. Bell, will call them back in, and they do have to provide documentation of their income. Yeah, there's a whole lot of documentation that has to occur to make sure that we're renting to eligible people and that they do have an income sufficient to pay the rent. Yeah.
I'm not sure my exact question, but in your initial slide, you showed the capital stack and you showed a number for construction costs.
Yeah.
Is there, do you play a role, or is there any influence or sourcing that actually brings down the cost, that construction cost, maybe some fixed, on the front end? When you build the capital stack, that lowers the overall investment that is necessary. What options in your role do you have to influence that?
Yeah, well, we don't have our own construction company,
Right.
so we put it out to bid.
Okay.
Yeah, and then people compete for it. So in that way, hopefully people are giving us the best deal. And I think just because we're connected to the industry, we have a sense of what's realistic. I know like back in our very early days, we did successfully do like volunteers turning apartments and all of that. But with these bigger deals that are with people investing large sums of money, everybody's looking at it. So we're looking at it and reviewing the bids and making the selections. And then the investor is looking at it and like, is this legit? And then the state's looking at it because they're putting money into it. Are these numbers legitimate? When we compete for tax credits, there's a cap for the cost per unit, that you can't go over a certain cost per unit. Yeah, so like that, there's some checks and balances to make sure.
On the construction side.
On the construction, well, actually it's on the total development.
Total development.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, you can't go over a certain cost per unit. Yeah, yeah.
So do you guys try to take buildings that already exist and refurbish, if you can, something that's already existing in the community, or do you really try to start from the ground up?
So the question is, do we try to do rehab and refurbish existing buildings, or do we start from the ground up? And we do both. So we've been around, like you saw, since the late 70s. And so we have a lot of buildings in Over-the-Rhine that are historic buildings that we've rehabbed. So we do both. We rehab. And then new construction, we're doing some new construction here in Northside at Vandalia. So we do both. We started in Over-the-Rhine. It was a grassroots effort. It was people who live in the neighborhood who wanted control of their housing and wanted to serve their neighbors. So we started acquiring properties way back then. And most of the properties in our inventory have been total gut rehab, but we still have some properties that were acquired in the early days where we didn't do all complete rehab, which would be like all new HVAC systems, including, heat and air conditioning. We still have properties where we just did like component rehab and kept all the historic things. So we've done it different ways. Not all of our properties were financed using low-income housing tax credits. And we like that because with low-income housing tax credits, it's very specific about the incomes you can serve, and it's really important to have that. But we also like having the flexibility, like with the building that we call the Folda. Claire's raising money for that so that we can upgrade the HVAC system. But that's been in our inventory for more than 30 years. And we have flexibility, so if somebody doesn't have all the paperwork, we can still rent to somebody and charge an affordable rent. Or maybe somebody's got a higher income and they support the mission and they're part of the neighborhood, they can rent those units where maybe they couldn't rent one of the low-income housing tax credits units, at least at initial move-in, because they make too much income. So we do like having that flexibility in our inventory of units that haven't gone through the whole LIHTC low-income housing tax credit refinancing or building and rehabbing. Yeah, we do both. The properties in Over-the-Rhine now are just way too expensive to acquire. So we're kind of priced out of Over-the-Rhine right now. And we're hopefully expanding, hopefully responsibly. We have a relationship with Kane here in this neighborhood, Nest, and of course we went to the community council. Kane, the new director there, toured Vandalia Point last week. So I know he'll be important, Kane will be important to supporting some residents there. We're excited too because of the transportation opportunities here in Northside, and the park right across the street, and walkable neighborhood, you know, all that good stuff. Just like Over-the-Rhine, you know, it's a really good place if you have a low income because it's walkable. You can get to the grocery, you can get to amenities, you can get to transportation, all of that good stuff.
One other follow-up question about construction costs. What's a hallmark in your mind of a builder slash partner in this equation? Or do you always go for the lowest bid, or do you?
Yeah.
Describe the profile of a builder that is aligned with your interests and values.
Well, Urban Sites, I mean, and I'll name a few, the Model Group, and we've worked with HGC. There might be a contractor that you've seen in neighborhoods. Triversity, yeah. So we go to those folks. I mean, Urban Sites has partnered with us on this project and the Barrister. This is our second project with them, and it's been a great partnership. The Model Group, they've been in Over-the-Rhine like us for 40 years. They're a good partner. They know, like, they're doing a project of ours right now in Over-the-Rhine with a group called Tender Mercies. It's taking existing buildings on 12th Street, and the Model Group, their headquarters are in Over-the-Rhine, and they understand, like, working in the urban neighborhood where you have tight spaces and you got to make accommodations for a streetcar and all of that kind of stuff. They're also our general contractor for a project we have called Glorious Place, which is not under construction yet, but it's on land that we own on a street in Over-the-Rhine called Dunlap. Some neighbors are fighting it, so it's been stalled for 2 years now. Even though we own the land, we've owned the land for 40 years, and but some neighbors are fighting it, so it's got stalled. But the Model Group will be our general contractor there. We put it out to bid, but they just have the experience, and they're right across the street. And then we talked to some smaller developers, and they have to be capitalized to take on some of the guarantees. And that's a challenge, and that means that they have to be able to guarantee that they're going to be able to build it for what they say they're going to build it for. And if they don't have the capital, then they can't make that guarantee. So it does require somebody who's been doing it for a while. Yeah, and then since we've been around a long time, we've had the experience. And it's interesting because, well, I could go on about it, but, depending who's running your job, you could have a different experience with the same company on one job than on the other job, because it depends who your foreman is and who's running the job. But I'm not out in the field much anymore. Claire and I aren't, so we can't speak too much, but Claire's had a lot of relationship building with Urban Sites.
I have one other question about the development in Vandalia Point.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the 30, 50, 60
Yeah.
breakout. Is that grandfathered in, or what? Or does that change if that's grandfathered in?
No, that's a great question. So it's deed restricted. The low-income housing tax credit program requires that we charge those rent levels for 30 years. The first 15, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency monitors it intensely to make sure that our rents are in that income range that we committed to and that we're serving the people that we said we would. And they do annual audits to make sure we have to turn in documentation every year. The investors, they're in for the first 15 years, but if we should, and then they're responsible for the first 10 years of compliance. So if during that first 10-year period, we rent to folks who are over income, there will be recapture of the tax credit. So it's pretty intense. Everybody's making sure that we're not serving folks we're not supposed to serve. Yeah, and it's deed restricted. And some of the other funding sources, like the city federal housing dollars, will restrict the deed as well. But I think what's important is the incomes, you have to qualify at move-in. So there's no requirement that I move in and I'm at 30% AMI, and then I've got my education finished, and then I get a job, and then I get a promotion, and my income goes up. I don't have to leave. I can stay. You have to qualify at move-in. And it's not subsidized where it's based on your income. So the rent we charge is that 50% rent based on the area median income, not your income, and then it stays that level. But with Section 8, as your income goes up, then your rent will go up because it's a percentage of your income. Yeah. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think in the beginning you had mentioned something like, from your point of view of what you think the solution is to some of the.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the question was, what do I think the solution is? I think because it's largely a math problem, I think the solution is money, capital. So you all may have remembered some of the campaigns that we were a part of for the last several years. Last time around, last November, it was called Issue 24. The time before that, when we tried, it was called Issue 3. And we were trying to get a dedicated source of funding for the city's housing trust fund. So the city has this housing trust fund that was established long after it could have been established, but no money was dedicated towards it. So with our efforts, we've pushed the city more, so now they're putting like $5 million in, but that would maybe help one project, maybe two. So so there was this dedicated source of funding for the housing trust fund that would have generated $50 million a year. And it would have just changed everything in terms of affordable housing. And it would help renters and homeowners, existing homeowners, new homeowners. Real estate taxes are an issue right now that a lot of long-term homeowners are dealing with in different neighborhoods. You've probably heard about the challenge if you haven't already experienced it yourself. That dedicated source of funding could have helped those homeowners. I know the city's has a program to help out those homeowners. It's $1 million, but real estate taxes are due twice a year, every year. It's not like it's a one-time thing. So the housing trust fund, I just think it's capital. There's just no way to get around the need for money. We can tweak different things. Zoning, sure, zoning is an issue, whether it's affordable housing or market housing. So there's been some zoning changes that will be helpful to all kinds of housing, whether it's affordable or not. It's really just about the money. We can't make it work. So maybe if we increased the minimum wage to like $25 an hour so that everybody was making $25 an hour, then we wouldn't have the same math problem because people would be able to pay higher rents, and then we could pay for the development and sustainability of units. Yeah. That's what I think the solution is. Mm-hmm. All right. One more plug just about affordable housing. I don't know where y'all live, but in Over-the-Rhine, we have affordable housing next to literally $1 million homes. So it doesn't destroy a market. It doesn't bring down property values. It can happen, and we have like concrete, you can knock on it. It's real legitimate affordable housing next to $1 million houses, and it's housing that serves people in some of the properties. Housing that serves people who've experienced chronic homelessness and addiction. We have $1 million houses in our backyard, and we were there first, and they built after we were there. So I understand the concerns about affordable housing and what it will do to property values, but we've just got really concrete examples that it works. So I just want to end with that. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for a long, depressing math problem, but important information. Thank you all for the thoughtful questions. So next month on November 6th, which is the day after you should be voting for science between now and then, you know, follow your regulations, make sure you vote. On November 6th, we're going to be talking about archaeology. So we're going to have some fun. We're going to have some theme music and talk about archaeology and take everybody's minds off the current news. So join us on that day. And then in December, we're going to have a chemist come and talk about environmental science. I haven't quite got that topic yet, but it should be fun as well. So we're here the first Wednesday of the month. You can follow Science on Tap on Facebook or on Meetup. Be sure to follow Radio Artifact, our partners. They live stream these events, and you can go out to their YouTube channel and see all our past events that we've had here as well. Thank you all for coming out. Have a safe drive home.